Well, I want to welcome everyone here today. My name is Fred Neal. I'm a board member of the Oregon State Capitol Foundation, and the foundation is very pleased to have been sponsoring the Speakers Bureau at the Oregon State Capitol. Representative Greenlick is the 7th of our speakers. We'll have more as the summer progresses. Especially want to draw attention to Chuck Johnson, who is coming here on Thursday, July 6th, to talk about his biography of Bob Straub, Standing at the Water's Edge. But also draw attention to the possibility that you could join us July 8th for the Beach Bill Birthday Bash. Got that out. Which is July 8th. First there's a concert, and then, of course, State Parks with the Capitol Foundation as a co-sponsor, sponsoring that bash. Then, of course, the eclipse, which will be a totality over this very building, darken the halls, but on the 21st. But first, there's out of this world eclipse concert in the Capitol Mall featuring the Salem Philharmonia Orchestra on Saturday. Then on Sunday, OMSI will be presenting lectures and educational activity for you and families and visitors. We expect many visitors throughout Oregon, then at least within the path of totality. And then we'll have an astronomer here on the morning of the eclipse to make sure your retinas are protected and describe what's going on, should you be able to get close enough to the speaker to hear him, because we expect mobs of people. I was just telling Representative Greenlick I'm a little chagrined that I moved out of his district, actually before he got elected, and did not know that he stayed in constant contact with his constituents and other Oregonians, beginning his first session, and I'm sure he's still doing it. And he kept them all, and they kept his constituents well informed of what he was doing and what the legislature was doing. And it's an amazing collection that he's now also commented on in the publication of his first, I think, 6 sessions in the legislature starting in 2003. The book is Capital Letters, An Inside View of the Legislative Process, and all proceeds of purchase go to the Oregon Historical Society, and we're privileged to have joining Representative Greenlick today the Oregon Historical Society Executive Director Kerry Tymchuk, also a former legislative staffer.
I always admired your work as elections director. And I appreciated it very much.
Thank you
for the kind introduction.
Well, thank you. With that nice compliment, with that, I welcome Representative Greenlick and Kerry Tymchuk.
Well, thank you. And we structured this. Representative Greenlick had a book signing at OHS last year, which was very successful, big turnout, and we structured it as an interview, so there weren't any speeches. It was just me grilling him with some tough questions, and he would answer them. So, but first, thank Representative Greenlick for the book and for donating the proceeds to OHS. We've had some nice sales. It is as someone who's been involved in the legislative process, it's a primer on how Salem works and how this building works. And if you're interested in that, if you're a new legislative assistant or if you're a lobbyist or anybody, this is a great example of how Salem works and sometimes doesn't work. And what impressed me the most, and I began this way up in Portland too, was the dedication of the book. One, he's a great husband. It's dedicated to his wonderful wife, Harriet. So he knows what to do there. But secondly, it's dedicated to my freshman year Republican mentors, Ben Westland and Layne Shetterly, who put me on the correct road. Ben, of course, would later become a Democrat, but at this time in this state and in this country, to have a book dedicated by a Democrat dedicated to Republicans, as he calls his mentors, that's a statement. And how did they help you, and have you paid it forward?
Well, those of you that that knew Ben Westland, who's a wonderful man, will appreciate this story. I had been elected, but I had not been sworn in yet, and I was wandering around the building, and I came out of the chief clerk office and said to somebody there, "Can you tell me how I can get to the Democratic caucus office?" And there was a man standing there, and he said, "I'll show you. I'll take you." And he grabbed me by the arm, and he took me to the elevator, and he said, "This is an elevator. You press that button." "Yes, sir." I pressed the button. The door opened. He dragged me into the elevator, and he said, "Press 3. It's the 3rd floor you're going to." "Yes, sir." I pressed 3. He dragged me out of the elevator when the door opened. He said, "That's the Democratic caucus. If you ever need anything, let me know. I'm Ben Westland." And I took that as an important invitation. Lane also was very important. He was maybe the wisest of anybody I've ever met in the building. He still hangs out here quite a bit with the Oregon Law Commission, which he shares. But Lane taught me a very important lesson, and what he told me, and this was important to me as a minority member, because in my first session I was in the minority, he said, if you don't care who gets the credit, you can get a lot done in this building. And that's when you say paying forward, that's been a lesson that I've tried to share with my freshman colleagues as they come into the building.
And I know you have paid it forward because Representative Bueller has told me on several occasions how helpful you have been to him when he came in as a freshman Republican, and like you, a doctor, that you have been very helpful to him too. So. Well,
it's always hard to tell a surgeon anything, but I've tried.
So the book, as you may know, is a compendium of the representative's columns, letters home, letters back to his district that he started in his first session and has continued for all these sessions, I assume ever since, in the last 2 sessions, continue to do that? So.
Yes, continue to do that. I'm a social scientist. I'm a researcher in recovery. And I knew when I came into the legislature I would want to write a book. And the question is, what do I do? Do I start taking copious notes? Do I try and keep a log? What do I do? And I thought, well, why don't I just send out a message to my friends and my constituents, maybe every other week, just sharing my reaction to the legislature. Very different than most of the messages that come, which are aimed at, they're much more tailored. Mine is very informal. Harriet always edits it and picks up my language mess, but other than that, it's been a very informal way of sitting back every couple of weeks and saying, well, what happened? How do I feel about it? What went on? And I think you'll find the message in it very different than most messages. But that's my way of keeping track of what's happening.
And I assume it's been helpful to you, too, to put as you put your thoughts down over the years, as you look back at what was going on every week. So
it's very helpful, and it's whatever happens to be on my mind. As I look back at it, it was really fun editing and reliving that experience of my first 6 sessions. Particularly, I noted the 4 or 5 objectives that I announced in my first session, and I've already gotten 2 of the 5 done.
just 2 more to go, 3 more to go. So
2 more to go. And I've announced that I intend to retire on my 100th birthday, so we'll see if how it lasts.
So the biggest surprise to you in the legislature? You knew about the system before coming in. You were involved as a volunteer. He even confesses in the book that he first volunteered for Franklin Roosevelt's 1944 campaign. So you do the math on that. But the biggest surprise once you got here, the partisanship?
No.
No?
The biggest surprise was the sense of history that you feel when I came down. Sat at my desk for the first time before session and looked around the room and thought, well, this is the 72nd Legislative Assembly. That meant 72 groups of people before have been doing the same kind of thing, not necessarily in this building, but standing out in the field in some cases. But the fact is, that sense of history, the continuity, was a huge surprise to me. The other thing that's been a surprise to me as I've thought about over time, and I continue to think about it, I was thinking about it again this morning, is how personal the experience of being a legislator is. I mean, we think of Congress and they're back there and they're sort of, yeah, they're people, but they're 535 people. In our case, it's 90 people. The fact is, it's a very different experience. It's different for me than for a surgeon, for example, who's going to go back over the weekend and do surgery. It's different for me than for a member who had an office next to mine who brought her little kid to work every day and took the child down to the Y, to the daycare center. We have common experiences, but we all have some very unique experiences as well, and that, I think, is something that was an important realization for me.
You bring your background as at Providence, or at Providence, at Kaiser and at OHSU, and other people bring different backgrounds. So,
and it means what they're doing is really a different thing than in each case. Although we're all voting on the same bill, we're not voting, as the case just happened, by not going back up to vote on the bill just now.
So the biggest disappointment so far for you in 8 sessions or 9, 10 sessions now, isn't it? 8 sessions, so.
Those 3 objectives I had in my first session that haven't happened.
And what were they?
Well, one was I really wanted to end up getting health care as a right in the Oregon Constitution. That hasn't happened yet. I am yet convinced that we need to merge OHSU and PSU into a single world-class institution. I think the efforts that we've had around here to move in that direction have moved them in ways that are really, really quite marvelous, but I haven't got that. I hope to solidify passenger rail in a way that hasn't happened as much as I'd like to see it happen, but I'm still working on these things, and I'll continue to work on them as long as I'm here.
Until you're 100.
Until I'm 100, or maybe not.
What should citizens know about the legislature that they don't?
Well,
or any assumptions they have that are wrong.
I think the notion that this is an extraordinarily partisan body is wrong. We were sitting on the floor. I guess it was Monday. We passed, 40 bills, and there wasn't a single one of them that had more than 5 no votes on it that day. Almost all the work we do here, and I think this is a message I've been trying to give to the citizens, is just business running the state. It's a bill to pass the budget of Fish and Wildlife, which is a bit of a problem right now at the moment. It's things we do, and we work them out in committee, and they generally pass on a bipartisan way out of committee, although occasionally they don't. About 60% of the bills we pass end up with fewer than 5 no votes on it. And there's another 20 or 25% of the votes of the bills we pass end up with a split, but not a partisan split. One of the most important bills I passed, I think I passed in my first session on a 32-28 vote, and the 32, I think, were 18 Republicans and 14 Democrats. I mean, so it's that 10 or 15% of the bills that turn brutally partisan that get all the attention, but that's not what our work is. Our work is working together, straightening out things that need to be straightened out. Sometimes they seem minor to people, but they're very important to some people. Sometimes they seem major, but I think that's the biggest failure that the media that follows us has portrayed. Now, things are different in Washington, and we can talk about why, but they're not that way here. This is mostly, we all like each other. Mostly we like each other. We work together. There's a time for political drama, which comes up, and that's sort of fun. And then when you're in a minority, I remember quite well I served 2 sessions in the minority and 1 session in a tie house, a 30-30 house. And when you're in the minority, you want to feel that you have some part in the game, so there's a role for some drama. But basically, the amazing thing is how well we work together.
And the 30-30 session was a famously productive session.
It was an amazingly productive. I had a co-chair, Jim Thompson. Everything that came out of the committee we had to agree to, but he was my vice chair before that, and everything that came out of the committee we agreed to anyway. So not all committees were quite that good.
No.
But certainly was on the healthcare side.
The Oregon, of course, is famous for its citizen legislator, as you know, not full-time pay. It's changed a little bit over the years with the addition of an even-numbered session. Can you foresee a future as Oregon gets bigger of a full-time legislature? Is that something we should avoid or emulate?
It's something we should avoid at all costs. In the last chapter of the book, I raised the issue, why is the Oregon legislature different than the National Congress? And the fact that we're a part-time legislature, I think, is a very important part. I think the fact that we all have to go back to life by July 10th for a while, and then come back for 1 month. We have to go back and face people on the street. We're not sort of in a cocoon that they seem to be in Washington. We can't go back and ignore what the people want. We're there and we're close to them. I think the function of size is important as well. Mm-hmm. We have only 60 people in the House and 100 people in that other body over there on the other side, as opposed to 100 senators in Washington and 435 members of the House. I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like to be one of 435. I have trouble remembering all the members of the House. No, I mean, it's just different, and I would not like to see us become a full-time legislature. We also can't afford it at the pay we get.
So that would have to change. You're elected to serve your district in Multnomah and Washington County. Did you also discover a duty to represent the state, to find out more about Klamath Falls or Ontario or Lakeview? Is it your job as an member of the Oregon House of Representatives to know more about issues outside your district, or are you just focused on what's good for your district?
Well, those are two different questions. I do need to learn more about the state because we represent the state. The question is, am I elected to represent my district in a specific way? Do I vote according to what my district wants? And I think the reality is, first of all, I come with a viewpoint, and a lot of times I vote based on my viewpoint. But then there are a lot of issues that I try and remember what my constituents want. They help me by sending lots of emails, lots of phone calls, and sometimes I listen very carefully. We're dealing with rent control issues, for example, and I'm hearing a lot from the realtors that live in my district. I live in a fairly wealthy district. I think the last time I saw the data, it was the second wealthiest district in the state. So I hear from a very specific group of people who are my constituents, and I do listen to my constituents in a different way. When I get mass emails, basically I delete everything that's not from my constituents. But then I also know I've taken an oath to represent the state, and I try and think about the extent to which the people of Oregon are represented I'm representing by my vote. And sometimes it goes one way, sometimes it goes the other way. Sometimes I'll vote the way I think my district wants me to vote. Although my district is probably 55 on one side and 45 on the other side on most issues. So do I vote with the 55 or do I vote with the 45? I hear from both of them.
Well, and you've been reelected 7 times without much opposition, so I think you've found the formula, I guess, that has helped. So
yeah, well, the redistricting helped too.
Well, you just mentioned that something in your book. You mentioned that you basically, I mean, there are the letters and phone calls that are genuine, or that come from constituents, and then there are the letters and phone calls that are obviously ginned up by outside organizations, and you tend to ignore those, you said. So
Well, sometimes they're hard to ignore. Fluoridation was an issue that gathered 3,000 or 4,000 emails and maybe the same number of phone calls. Harriet stopped answering the phone at some points on that. Gun control triggers that kind of a reaction, where we'll get thousands of emails. We try and put a junk filter in to stop it. I remember one time I woke up on a Sunday morning and there were 800 email messages in my inbox, not unusual. And then the strangest one of all was I once had a bill to outlaw having tiny children in a bike trailer, because I had heard that just before that bill came, somebody had driven in front of another car with a bike trailer, and the car had almost run over the bike trailer. Well, you would think that I was doing something that would end Western civilization as we knew it. I got hundreds and hundreds of messages from the bike lobby. I got messages from Europe. I got messages from Africa saying how I was trying to destroy life in Oregon by making it hard to do bikes. So I've been very careful about bike legislation.
you write in one of your columns about the tremendous power that the Speaker has in the Oregon legislature. As you reflect on your past 8 sessions, is that a good, a bad, indifferent?
It's there.
It's there.
It's real. And also the power that a committee chair has, which is kind of intriguing me. This is where I sit with this gavel in the healthcare committee, and I pretty much can decide on my own which bills I'm going to hear and which bills I'm going to allow a vote on. It's pretty much in the power of the chair. The Speaker can't order me to do something. On the other hand, if she hopes I do it, isn't that the language we were talking about in national television? If she hopes I do something, and I like holding this chair, and I'm very likely to help her hopes come true. But the power is really very strong. I mean, the Speaker gets decide where bills are assigned to. Generally speaking, she does decide who chairs the committees, and she does chair the nature of the committees. I would actually incidentally support having the minority naming the members of the minority of their committees. I've said that all along, and I try very hard to make sure that the wishes of people to be on my committee, I try and support that. But it's a very powerful role. And we've had some different kinds of speakers, and they've all done their job pretty well.
The office in the middle of the building, the governor's office. Mm-hmm. What's your reflections on the relationship between the legislative branch and the executive branch?
Well, I've had experience now with Kitzhaber, Kulangowski, Kitzhaber, and Governor Brown, and they've had various effects of the building. I know Kitzhaber's first terms, which were before I got here, he got to be known as Dr. No because he vetoed bills, and I've heard recently that the Republicans who were in charge of the House and Senate liked to send him bills to veto just to make his life more interesting. He declared the state was ungovernable at the end of his term, and then came back and governed it, I thought, pretty well, except for some personal problems he got into. I think the governor's role has been much less powerful than I would have expected it to be in the state. The governor produces a balanced budget at the beginning of each year, which is basically ignored by the Ways and Means chairs, who take that and create their own budget to start off. I've had one of my bills vetoed by one of the governors, and that's basically all. Although
So you had a bill vetoed by the governor of your own party.
Yes. I'm still smarted. I don't like to lose. I particularly didn't like a bill which was a rational bill being vetoed for what I considered were irrational reasons. But basically,
Yeah.
I saw someone there. Two people are saying, "What was the bill?"
Yeah. You could try it again.
I'll tell you what the bill was. The bill was an interesting bill that was going to do a research project that I had organized at OHSU on the question of whether having a chiropractor as being a primary care provider in workman's compensation would make a difference in the ultimate outcome for workman's compensation. The bill went to Governor Kulongoski, who was the organizer of the Mahonia Hall reform for workman's compensation, that essentially restricted the power of chiropractors rationally inside workman's compensation. And he just wasn't up to a bill that would tamper with that.
Okay.
And however much I argued with him and with his DCBS director, who was also a part of that, I could not get him to let that bill go through to actually test the process. And it got into a strange argument about whether the committee, I forget the name of the committee that works with workers' compensation, whether both sides had agreed to it, both the labor and the management side. And it was an unfortunate thing, and it never came back. And I couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. But that's the only bill I've ever had, and I've passed dozens of bills that have been vetoed by a governor. They've been influential. I work very closely. I've liked all of our governors, and I work very closely with them. But I'd say it's not like New Jersey. The governors don't stop the Burnside Bridge from being...
No. So, your reflections on, you talked about the executive branch, on working across the chamber with the Senate. Is it cooperation? Is it competition? A little bit of both?
Some people say the Senate is the hospice where good bills go to die. I think we work very closely together, and I think we slow up bills that members of the Senate want. I think they slow up bills that we want. I've had some stormy occasions dealing with the Senate, but I've had some really powerfully good occasions working with them. I've had some of my very best friends have been over there. The Alan Bates, for example, we miss very, very much. He had a very important role for those of us involved in the healthcare field. His role was critical. He also was the doc with the black bag that showed up when I felt dizzy one day or something like that. I mean, we're very close. And I work very closely with the healthcare committee with Senator Monis Anderson and Senator Simon Haywood, Representative Cruz, good friends, and I love working with them. There's something in the atmosphere over there, though. I think it's in the air that makes senators sometimes behave like senators. Mm-hmm. And I will say I've turned down the opportunity to go to the Senate 3 times because I really love working in the House. I think we're very close, and I think the House is really a great place to work. It's a great community.
So part of the Capitol community is the lobby. Sometimes get a bad rap out there from the public, but my experience has been they're all outstanding people representing their interests, and that's what their job is. And your experience with working with the lobby here in Salem?
Well, I think I have some very good friends in the lobby. I work very closely with people representing a variety of different perspectives. I have just introduced a bill to deal with the question of using tax money to make political contributions. I think that's a big problem. I think we have to deal with that. There was a 1 week article on it yesterday on the issue, but I think by and large the lobby's been very straightforward. I learned when I first ran, I was schooled by the lobbyists and what it is they expect when they make a campaign contribution. And basically what they expect was the ability to see me when they need to, and my being, if I wish, telling them how I expect to vote on a bill. And the most important lesson that came from an old lobbyist who's no longer with us was, if I say I'm going to vote one way and I change my mind, let them know, because they hate being embarrassed in front of a client when they've done that. But I'd like to see even more in the citizen lobby, the folks that represent the citizens that are here on a volunteer basis. I'd like to find ways to make their life easier, and I try and help them as much as I can. And then I also have certain people in the lobby that I like a lot. But I think I only one time have ever told Harriet not to make an appointment with a lobbyist. Was after a particular bloody fight on a referral that I just didn't want to see his office for a while. That didn't last too long either.
The biggest change in your 8 sessions that you've seen in the legislature?
The legislature's gotten younger.
Or you've gotten older. One of the two.
It might be that. What I will say that's interesting is the role of women has changed in the legislature. I think our caucus now, I think, is a majority female. We have 3 of the 4 leaders in the building. The 2 majority leaders and the Speaker of the House are women. I think that's been a huge improvement. Although we had, I came in, there was a female Speaker of the House, so it wasn't totally. And I think that's important. And I joke about the legislature being younger, but in fact, I think they are younger. I think we have many more really bright young people. Now, I don't know how they do it. It's much easier to afford to be a legislator when you're retired and have an IRA to back you, or have a wealthy spouse, but it's very hard to be a young professional and be a member of the legislature and try and keep up a career. It's very difficult. I remember when Brad Avakian first came in with me, and in my first session, he had a law practice going, and he ended up literally having to close his law practice because he couldn't afford to be a legislator and run a law practice. So I love the young people in the legislature.
You mentioned how tough it is for a young family, and I have mentioned to the Speaker and President Courtney several times, if you want someone to fall on the sword to raise legislative salaries, I'll do it. Put me on the head of a blue ribbon panel, because it's obscene in my mind how low legislators are paid, and they expect you to come down here. Can there ever be I know it's such an easy issue to demagogue, of course, if you vote to increase your own pay. Is there a way to make pay commensurate with what you actually do?
Well, some people think $24,000 a year isn't enough money. But there has to be a way to tie your pay to something else. And our pay was tied, I think at one point, to the starting salary of judges or something, but that was kind of embarrassing, and we stopped doing that. So no, I don't think it's an easy project.
Well, we want to leave time for some questions from the audience, because then the representative will be out in the hallway signing books for books. So I know people want to get some. So who's got a question? Yes.
So I'm just curious, with the addition of the short session in the even-numbered years, if that has been good, productive?
Has the addition of the short session been good, productive, or not?
I supported it, in fact, and I think it has been useful. I've had a problem with the day limits on the 2 sides. And that seems to me to put a lot of extra pressure. I would have liked a little longer opportunity for that short session. The dilemma in the short session was not consensus on what the intention was. There are some people that think the purpose of the short session was to make sure the budget's all right and to fix things that got screwed up since the last session. Others of us think it's a 40-day opportunity to do some things that should have happened in the last session that didn't. I mean, I've got a couple of bills now, one in revenue and one in Ways and Means and one in Rules, that may not get out even though they've been worked this far. I'd certainly like to have another shot at them in the short session, which is still the same 79th Legislative Assembly. But that's caused a little conflict, and I don't think we have agreement. But I think basically we're better off. We're looking at things in Washington right now that we don't know what's going to do to the healthcare system. And if we didn't have a short session coming, we'd be planning a special session in October already. We may be able to delay that because who knows what's going to happen. But yeah, I think basically it's a good thing.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Gotta be, yes.
A staff person recently said to me that they thought legislators, when they were working on bills, deliberating on bills and issues in committees, were thinking about what's good for the state. But then when they got to the floor, they switched their thinking and only voted for things good for their district. Have you ever heard or thought about that? I had never conceived of that, but statewide, my constituents, have you ever?
I think the question is, some legislators are reputed to vote in committee for what's good for the state, and then when they get to the floor, they would vote maybe instead, or to reinforce their first vote, to vote what's good for their district. And has Representative Greenlick encountered that or ever been impressed with that occurring?
Well, I think it goes both ways, and I think sometimes there'll be a sort of rumble about you're not taking care of rural areas, you only care about urban areas. And sometimes that may be true. I mean, because the issues that are important to our constituency are things, I mean, my constituents are Northwest Portland and Washington County, and I need to think about that. But I think in things that have more general implications, I think most of us tend to think of it from the perspective of the state. For new members, they're always worried about how their vote's going to affect them in the next election. I tell them, Democrat and Republican alike, don't worry about how you vote. They're going to lie about you in the next election anyway. Doesn't matter. And I think more and more that happens. But it's harder on a freshman to decide. And I think they are, on both sides, are much more likely to be responsive to their district. And sometimes you can't tell. I mean, I can convince myself that's what's good for my district is good for Eastern Oregon, but that may not be a very compelling argument in that case. But yeah, it's on all our minds. I think the more interesting issue in some ways is what's the balance between my personal belief system, the values that I bring, and about things, and how that plays out in terms of my district. I mean, for example, I really care about poor people. I've spent my whole life on that. There's a rent control bill we're facing now, and I said my constituents aren't too worried about that rent control. They're much more likely to be landlords in my district. And I hear from a bunch of landlords now, am I going to vote because I've gotten 30 emails from landlords about how if we had rent control it'll destroy the market, or am I going to think about poor people? Well, it's hard. I haven't decided yet. Depends on how that bill is going to come out. So sometimes I struggle with that as well.
My old boss, Gordon Smith, used to talk about the fact that if you just wanted to poll your district and then vote however the majority said, you just needed a weather vane as a senator representative. You didn't need a person, but you elect people who have their own opinions and their own background and their own experiences. And you have to bring that to the job with you, like you said.
And you have to be able to explain to people why you've done things. And I think that's one of the important things of this message is sometimes it gives me the opportunity to explain why I voted in what may be a counterintuitive way on a bill.
And yet you still invited in your letters to hear more from constituents, which was, I think, very admirable.
You know, that's one of the things that's really interesting, I think, now from the last decade. Emails had a much more important effect. You used to get piles of letters and phone calls, and now it's such easy communication. I mean, you can take a poll by just reading your email.
Yeah.
And it's changed everything, I think.
There's a wonderful foreword in the book as well from Congresswoman Bonamici, who gives the representative credit for starting her political career. She met him at a house party when he was running for office, and she was so inspired. She volunteered for his campaign, and then he got recruited. We helped recruit her to run for office, and now she, of course, is in Congress. And she describes him as a man with extraordinary talent, intellect, bold ideas, and a gigantic heart. That's how she talks about Representative Greenlick.
Oh, I thought that was ego.
Not at all.
So any other questions? Yes, two more. So.
I'm a citizen, very interested citizen in what goes on down here, and I find sometimes it's very hard to find that out, and that transparency isn't quite as good as I thought it was in Oregon. Can you talk a little bit about transparency?
Well, first let me talk about OLIS, which the Organized Labor Information is helping a lot, I think, in making transparency. It has all the documents get into OLIS that are presented to the committee. We have all the amendments that are presented get into OLIS. I think learning how to use OLIS, I mean, it's something that we try and tell citizens when I work with them. Transparency is, I think, getting better for exactly that reason. On the other hand, it's really hard. I mean, I rely on my legislative aide to tell me what's going on, to find out, and they gossip among the aides. That's their most important business, is gossiping with each other, and we can find out what's going on. But it is hard, and you really have to be down here pretty much, and it's very hard for citizens. That's what I was talking about. We need to do things to make it easier for citizen lobbies. Being a part of an organization helps, because then the League of Women Voters and other organizations have ways, other consumer organizations have ways to help people that are, I think, very useful. But
a question back there.
Since you've only been a legislator for 8 sessions, since you were a private citizen before that for a long time, what is your view on the kicker law, having been in the legislature the last however many years?
View on the kicker law. So.
On the kicker, and let me take that to a little bit broader stage, because it fits into the. We're constantly being told the legislature should behave like a business, or it should behave like a family, that we make spending decisions when we don't have money and things like that. My perspective is, when I have a family, when I'm running my family, I save money regularly, and I put it aside on a regular basis. And then I get a windfall. I hit a minor lottery, or I get a bonus, and I've now got an extra $50,000 or $20,000 that comes to me. I don't give that back to the person who gave it to me and said, well, thank you very much, I'm going to give it back to you, I don't need it. I put it into a bank account. And then when things get tough, when I have extra expenses, I don't expect somebody gets sick, I have to put a roof on my house, I have a bank account to go to then take that money to pay for that extra expense. With the kicker, I've given away the flexibility that I ought to have in order to allow me to act like a business or like a family when I'm making legislative decisions. I think it's a terrible idea. I think if people had a better year and they provide more money, that's good, and we ought to take that money and put it in the bank. We ought to not give it back to the taxpayers, because we're going to then have to hurt them in the next session when we don't have enough money and we don't have the reserves to pay for it. So I think the kicker prevents us from acting like a business or like a family when we're making fiscal decisions. And I think it's a big problem, and I would definitely do away with it if I could. I think we made an advantage when we stopped sending that check at Christmas time to really get people addicted to it. I mean, it's like cocaine when you use it that way. I think taking it off as a part of the tax bill is a better thing, which makes it much less important to people.
Enticing. Yeah.
Well, Stacy, what are the logistics? If people want to buy a book, and are they at the table, or do they need to go to the gift shop? Or
go to the gift shop, and then right outside the gift store, he will be signing. And we also have refreshments in the lobby.
And thank you all for coming.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody.
A special bonus today. If you buy a book today, I'll be there. You'll get a free membership in the Oregon Historical Society.
Woohoo.
And that's a $60 regular cost. So motivation to buy today. So
What does that do about membership renewals for some of us? Well, thank you all for being here. I want to remind you again that Chuck Johnson will be here July 6th at noon in the next of our speaker series. He's author of the book Standing at the Water's Edge, Bob Straub's Battle for the Soul of Oregon. It's also a great book, and you'll enjoy reading it and hearing from Chuck.
I have it.
Thank you all again, and thank you to Representative Greenlick and to Kerry Tymchuk.